All right, we're looking in today's video at broadcast journalism. I mentioned at the end of the video, and I'll say it up here at the front end as well. Um, uh, the journalism program is housed here at University of Tampa in the English department, but we collaborate closely and work in partnership with the communications department that actually teaches broadcast journalism. So if this is something that you're particularly interested in professionally or to pursue as a major, then I would encourage you to get in touch with the folks over there at communications and by all means, I'm happy to point you in the right direction of someone to speak with as well if you'd like to get in touch with me and find out who you'd want to talk to. But they have a wonderful program over there, and I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you about it anytime that you're interested in. Okay, in today's video, we're going to talk about broadcast journalism or writing for news over the air. Broadcast journalism has typically been defined as journalism communicated in an electronic format. Now, of course, that definition is getting complicated in the digital era when nearly everything can be communicated in an electronic format. But traditionally, broadcast journalism was understood as essentially TV and radio. Of course, now we might also include things like internet videos and webcasts. But broadcast journalism as a style differs from print journalism, which uses the physical medium of paper. That has been the traditional distinction, and again, that is not as hard of a boundary as it once was. But generally, if you hear people talk about broadcast, they still are referring to TV and radio. Now, when we talk about broadcast journalism, of course, in some ways, it's the same. We're still talking about journalism, right? And our beloved definition of the primary purpose of journalism is to provide citizens with the information to be free and self-governing. And so in that context, broadcast journalism operates according to some of the same principles and practices that print journalism does. So, for example, stories are assigned by editors, or sometimes in the case of broadcast news, they're referred to as producers or news directors. Reporters still have to go out and gather information through interviews and field observations and background research. You still have the same importance of accuracy, so information has to be fact-checked and attributed. And we're still doing professional quality journalism, right? So the work still has to be polished and edited. Now, obviously, the editing process for broadcast is different than it is for print, but the dedication to a professional, polished product is consistent in broadcast journalism as it is in print journalism. But certainly there are some ways that broadcast journalism is different. One of the big ways is that whereas in print journalism our content is bounded by concerns and considerations of space, so how long a story is or how many pages are going to go into a magazine is dictated by physical space, right? How much can fit into the magazine, or how much of a story can fit on a given page that's allotted to it. In broadcast journalism, the constraint is time. So how much time do we have to tell a story? How much time do we have to fill in our dedicated news broadcasts, right? So if you have 30 minutes of news or of a news program that's you've promised viewers that will come on every night and they'll get 30 minutes of news, minus commercials, then you have to fill that time. Similarly with a newspaper, right? You have to fill the space, right? You have to have content to go in a newspaper or in a magazine or on a website. In broadcast journalism, we're talking about the constraint being time. Broadcast journalism is also a more captive medium, and so people can always change the channel, but it's more difficult to switch to another story. So in some ways this means that if you can get a faithful audience that comes to you every night and stays with you for the entire 30 minutes, then you've locked them in. Whereas a newspaper reader may peruse the newspaper and pick through headlines to see what he or she is most interested in. Obviously, online we have a huge degree of selectivity in terms of what kind of news stories we want to read. In broadcast journalism, you can change the channel. You can tune out of a broadcast news program, but as long as you have committed to watching that program, with the exception, obviously, of recorded programming or on-demand video or that sort of thing, you can fast forward and rewind and whatnot. But on the whole, when we talk about broadcast journalism, your audience is more captive, for better or for worse. Now, in light of these considerations, for example, the fact that we have a captive audience in broadcast journalism, we need to make every minute of that program count, right? And so generally, the stories in a broadcast news program are going to be more compacted. For example, tell stories on a TV newscast, those that are simply read by the anchor without any additional video footage or in-the-field reporter, those are generally only 10 to 30 seconds long. That's about 2 to 5 sentences, not very much. Viewers would never sit down and listen to a newscaster read through an entire print story. They would fall asleep, or they would simply change the channel and go somewhere else. So broadcast news has to provide the information to the public very quickly and very succinctly, even more so than a print journalist is required to do. If we look here at this script from a broadcast segment by Matt Henson, he's a WCAX news reporter, or as of 2011 he was in Bethel, Vermont, we can see this very direct, very succinct, boiled down approach applied. So if we read here, investigators say the case began last night with a report of a missing person. Very simple, very straightforward. Tonight, state police remain at this home on Dart Hill in Bethel after a man was found dead inside. Keeping the sentence to one main point. Also inside, police found a 19-year-old woman unconscious and unresponsive. Again, very simple, very direct. She was airlifted to DHMC with life-threatening injuries. So we can see here, right, how the overall script, the content here is very direct, keeps everything to one main point. No room for anything that isn't going to add value in the least to this story. Now, sometimes you will have broadcast stories that run in longer programs. So if you think about, say, 60 Minutes, or some of the stories that they run on NPR, or if you've ever seen the PBS documentary news-style show Frontline, you will see much more in-depth pieces appear in those venues. Radio stories sometimes do provide a bit more room to elaborate, but you'll still find that they're written in very compact sentences, even if they go into a little bit more depth. Again, news magazine TV shows, special reports, documentaries. This is where TV broadcasters have the opportunities to fill out and flesh out fuller stories than we might find in the nightly news broadcast. Some things to keep in mind if you're writing a script for a broadcast program. Write with rhythm. Broadcast journalism is meant to be heard, right? In the case of television, it's meant to be heard and seen. In the case of radio, it's heard. So you are writing to read this information to your viewing or listening audience. So keep your sentences tight and simple, both for your benefit and the benefit of your audience. Again, write to read aloud. Watch out for words that you or your listener might stumble over, right? Don't make it difficult on yourself. You're not going to, write some sort of tongue twister like, 7 sailors said Saturday that several of their shipmates should show some consideration and shower. I mean, that's a mouthful, and you're going to have a hard time getting through that on your broadcast. Or trying to sound overly smart, right? Maritime hygiene has been a polemical point of discussion among military circumnavigators for more than a fortnight, right? Nobody talks like that. So you're not going to win any points with your viewers or listeners if you go trying to pack your broadcast scripts with a bunch of unnecessarily big words or unusual combinations of words in your sentences. Some other tips, when attribution is necessary, you want to begin your sentence with it. This is the norm in broadcast, but not for print, because again, broadcast journalism is meant to be heard, right? And so you want to tell your reader up front, or excuse me, you want to tell your listener, your viewer up front, who it is that this information is coming from. You don't want to make them have to backtrack in their mind to connect the information with who said it. In print journalism, it's okay. We see the visual cues of quotation marks, or our eyes can easily move backward in the paragraph to connect the source with the information. In broadcast journalism, because we're receiving this information in real time, it's more difficult to do that. Rely on nouns and strong verbs. Keep your writing very concrete. Honestly, this is good advice for print journalism as well. For any writing that you do, the more you can avoid adjectives and adverbs and let your nouns and verbs carry the power, the better off you'll be. Avoid starting a story with a participle phrase, right? So, hoping to keep the lid on spiraling prices, the president called today for wage price guidelines for labor and industry, right? This, similar to not attributing your source up front, this makes the viewer or listener wait until after you get past that initial participle phrase to understand what's really going on in the sentence. And so it's better if you can write the sentence more directly. For example, the president is calling for wage price guidelines to keep prices down, right? That's a much more direct way of saying it and gets the news and the core of the information to the listener or the viewer up front. Tell the audience when a source is being quoted, but don't use quote, end quote, or unquote, right? Instead, you want to use something like, these are his words, or as he put it, right? So if you were putting into a story, a broadcast story, saying, the Grinch said they're finding out now that no Christmas is coming, you wouldn't want to say, the Grinch said they're finding out now that, quote, no Christmas is coming, unquote, right? Instead, we might say something like, the Grinch said, and these are his words, they're finding out now that no Christmas is coming, right? So that would be a more conversational, a more fluid way to get that across, that this is a direct quote. And as some final tips for broadcast writing, hyphenate letters in a script if you're going to read them aloud, right? So if we're talking about Tampa General Hospital, TGH, you want to make it clear to yourself or whoever's reading the script that we're saying TGH and they're not going to try to pronounce that as a word. I guess that would be tuch, or maybe they would think it was tough or something like that. So to avoid that confusion, using hyphens to separate the letters can be very helpful. Another difference between broadcast and print in terms of how we would write something like $45 million. In print, we would make it more concise spatially by using the dollar sign and then just writing 45 million. However, because we want to make our scripts as fluid as possible and as easy to read as possible, in broadcast journalism you would write that out as $45 million. So again, you want to minimize the amount of sort of mental interpretation that you or whoever is reading the script has to go through in order to read that aloud clearly. Spell out numbers 1 through 11 in AP style. In print journalism, we would say spell out 1 through 9 and use numerals for 10 and above. But 11 particularly can be a tricky one because you can see if you miss a space as you write out the script, one can easily confuse something like the hospital would give a refund to 11 people for the mistake. One could easily confuse that as looking like the hospital will give a refund toll people for the mistake. And of course that doesn't make any sense, but once you've said it right on air, you can't take it back. particularly if it's a live broadcast. Those are just a few tips in writing scripts for broadcast journalism. I'll say that the communications department on campus here at UT is the place where they handle broadcast journalism more specifically. And so if this is a particular career field or major that you're interested in, I really encourage you to go by and get in contact with them and explore what they have to offer more over there.